Before we go ahead and cut everyone loose and let you try to catch flights out, I just want to bring up Charlie Venema. He is, it's funny, I feel like I've known him for years because I've talked to him on the phone countless times, and this is actually the first time this weekend is when we've met in person. So I'm sorry that I missed the beard yesterday, but I hear it was epic. So Charlie Venema does great things with CheckedAndSet and has absolutely been a mentor virtually for quite some time, and it's been an honor to meet you and talk to you. And so hopefully we can take this thing home and hear some good stuff. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. My name's Charlie Venema. I'm a 756 captain for United. I did have about a 5-inch beard yesterday when I rolled into town. I've been on a medical leave since April. I go back in 2 weeks. And my daughter, who lives in Tampa, hadn't seen it in person, so I sported it for her yesterday, and she promptly told me to shave it off, so I got rid of it, which my wife will be very glad for. I sell confidence, is what my company does. So when I was a senior manager of pilot hiring at United, when I would go through and rack and stack, and when I would do, we called it a hand wash at United, in reviewing each app and checking it for legitimacy, if you will, against what our algorithm would produce, I would toss 35 to 40% because the data wasn't correct, it wasn't complete, or it was misrepresented in some form or fashion. So when I went back to the line, I started CheckedAndSet. And we do app reviews and resume reviews. And so what I wanted to do is kind of give you some high-level things that you can practically use when you take them out of here. How many people are already CheckedAndSet clients? They're in here. All right, so I got quite a few. We specialize in 5 companies. So airline apps with United and Delta, and on pilot credentials with FedEx, Southwest, and American. The 2 portals are widely different. Airline apps, the nice thing with that particular product is United and Delta, the application, the guts, if you will, with the exception of one question, is identical. And you cannot separate the data to one or the other. So the 99% compatibility, the only question that's different is the legacy question. United sees the answer to that question and Delta does not. And then, of course, the addendums are slightly different, but they're generally, by and large, the same. Pilot credentials, fundamentally, global is a magnificent idea. It just doesn't work. And so it not only exports errors for Southwest, but it exports errors for American, and it exports errors for FedEx. And so what we generally tell people to do is abandon global. You're going to spend more time hand jamming your individual apps, assuming you're pushing a wide net, but it'll be less time on the individual hand jam to update 3 apps than it will be to go on an Easter egg and try and find out where the latest data sync sent you wrong information out there. I'd love to meet the pilot credentials folks in the dark alley one day and share my opinion. The nice thing for me, the guys at Airline Apps are friends of mine. And so I communicate regularly with the president and the vice president at Airline Apps. When we find things that are problematic, I pick up the phone and I call Plato. Plato, why is your system doing this? Oh, we didn't know it did that. I'm like, well, it's doing that. And just to let you know, and they're very responsive, so that helps. And we've got a great relationship with those guys over there. What I wanted to kind of talk about today, and the slide that I have up is from my website. It's Veterans Day. Again, most of you are vets as you come in here. One of the things that we are incredibly proud of is our service to you. And when you go to our page, and every month, I go through the reports of who's been hired and where they've come from. And these are all just, they're unit patches from guys that have gotten the job at United, American, Delta, FedEx, or Southwest. And there's nearly 400 individual units and from all branches that we've worked with over the course of the last 4 years. So the company's 4 years old. I have 4 guys that work with me. They're all Delta pilots. Long story behind that, but 3 of them I helped get hired at Delta. One is a civilian. Wes was my very first client at CheckedAndSet. I needed a guinea pig. He volunteered, and he's been at Delta for 2.5 years. Casmer, I helped Casmer as well, and John Brennan. Dan Stoker on my team was already a Delta captain when he joined my team. And it takes about 3 months for me to spool somebody up to be a counselor on my team. There's a lot of data, and you guys know that because you're inputting it on one side, but to go and take it and evaluate it and massage it on the back end takes a lot of time. And everybody is different, right? Everybody's different. I'm going to dive into some details, and I think I'm just going to go to the home page on that, which I can't see. Would you do that for me, please? When you were talking about the situation-based interview, I chuckled over here because one of the things when I was a hiring manager, and when you go to conferences, you'll meet other people from hiring departments at other airlines, and generally you'll find a way to socialize. And my favorite story of an applicant response to one of those was from SkyWest Airlines, because they do a little sim event. And the response that you should not have in that situation is Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Which was my favorite start from one of the guys at SkyWest. All right, so let's talk about the apps for a minute. When pilot credentials and airline apps, fundamental differences, in addition not only to the companies, but the data. Airline apps, you do not have the ability to attach a resume. So Delta and United, you cannot bring a resume into that product. So how do you tell Delta and United the good things that you've done over the course of your career? You use the duties description box, all right? You can also use the reason for leaving box effectively to help tell your story. When we work with clients, we don't know you from anybody. And what we want is when someone reviews your paperwork at the airline, we want them to be able to figure out your story without scratching their head and going, why don't I understand what happened between here and here? And so when we review your stuff, if we can't figure that out, we're going to tell you in the conversation, hey, what's going on here, because I'm not following where you're going. And then we have the conversation and we try and iron it out so that someone who picks it up can make that flow and go through. In the duties description box in airline apps, you get 500 characters to make a description. I tell my clients all the time, 500 characters is a limitation, not an objective, okay? You're not trying to fill the box full of crud, you're trying to be impactful. Sometimes less is more in that particular section. All right, pilot credentials. You include a resume, right? So when you're applying to American, Southwest, and FedEx, you're going to include your resume. A good resume, we were having sidebar conversations on this today, is a single-page document, right? It's your Reader's Digest highlight reel of your career. Not everything you've done in 20 years of military service in terms of the things that you've accomplished is going to make it to the resume. But I should be able to see your career on the document. I should be able to see your certificates and ratings. I should be able to see your flight time. And oh, by the way, the data on your resume should match the data that's on your app. So one of the things that I encourage my clients to do is as a resume audit. And so I would toss that out to you as a homework project for something that you can do at home. Print your resume, or print your app, or print both. Look at your work history. It says I worked here from July of 16 to present. Your app says you worked there from May of 16 to present. Why are they different? They shouldn't be any different, right? Are your work histories the same? Are the dates that you graduated from college, where your undergraduate and your graduate degree programs, they're the dates that are on the app, the same dates that are on the resume? They should be, right? Same with flight time. Your flight time on your resume should match your flight time on your app. So how do we make that happen? Because there's a ton of different ways to do flight time, right? Well, whichever way that you've chosen to go and whatever path you've gone down there, when you've loaded that into your app, I tell my clients, start, fill out your app. Use your logbook, use your spreadsheet, make sure that your times are tight. Then use your app as your data source to populate your resume. And when you do that, the documents are going to be the same. Well, Charlie, I'm going to update my app every 2 weeks. My suggestion to you is to update your resume when you update your app. Don't give the airline conflicting data, right? When they pull your stuff and they look at it for the very first time, you'd like them to say, squared away, right? And if you're squared away there, then that sets a nice stage and a nice tone for when you get yourself into the interview. Delta, for a resume, will never see your resume unless you meet them at a career fair. They will not ask you to bring a resume to an interview. United, the first time they see your resume outside of a career fair is going to be at the interview. So different products, different processes for different airlines. All right, let's talk about airline apps for a minute. When we do things in airline apps, by and large, we're driven by Delta. There's no one from Delta here. They're batshit crazy. right? So I've got to list every job. I've got to list my schools. The education section is extraordinary, and their checks and balances and the things that they do when they go through the app to verify things are just crazy. So let's talk about, for the military pilots, let's talk about the education section for a minute, because this is where I spend a lot of time with clients. And when I only have an hour with you, if there are things that you can do that are going to be better, that makes our engagement more productive in some of the other areas rather than covering basic things. Delta essentially wants to know where you learn to fly. And so by providing this information to Delta, United's going to get the same information, right? Because I can't separate airline apps into what United can see in the education section and what Delta can see in the education section. It's one education section that's viewable by both companies, right? Delta essentially wants to know where you learn to fly. So by dominant, or large show of hands, there's mostly Air Force pilots in here. So I would expect to see in your education section ASBC, right? And then I'd expect to see an entry where you go off to UPT. And what if you do primary and advanced at the same station, you did them both at Columbus, that's fine. So, but the name of the school, because it asks for the name of the school and it asks the name of the program. Think of the school as the provider of the training. Think of the program as the type of training that was accomplished, all right? i.e., we're at Columbus. You did primary and advanced flight training at Columbus and UPT. You can have that as a single entry. The name of the school would be the Ump Flying Training Wing, and the program might be Joint Specialized Undergraduate Pilot Training, right? Then you're going to go off to your first assignment, right? Let's say you're going to C-130s. I'm going to see the FTU in Little Rock, and I'm going to see a qualification in your education section that's your C-130 initial qualification. Then you're going to go to your first active duty assignment, right? So wherever that takes you around the world, let's say it takes you to Japan. So now I'm a C-130 guy and I'm in Kadena. So we go over there, flying, we make AC. I'm going to expect to see, or Delta's going to expect to see in the education section, your AC qual in the C-130. Then I go back to Little Rock and I go back to the FTU and I become an instructor. I'm going to see an entry in the education section with the Ump Flying Training Wing or Airlift Squadron at Little Rock for the FTU for your IP qual. Then you go back to the squadron, you become an evaluator pilot. I'm going to see an expectation for the EP qual in the education section for Delta, right? Who knew? If you change airframes, rinse and repeat. I'm going to see your ATP in the Delta education section, right? So wherever it is you did that, Downtown Aviation in Memphis or Sanders Aviation or hopefully Milta ATP, all right, in Pikesville. If you did the Delta ATP CTP course, we're going to see that in the education section piece as well, right? Things that I generally don't go down the rabbit hole in the education section, 2-ship flight lead, 4-ship flight lead, AR quals, NVG quals, functional check flight pilot quals. I keep it at the big pieces, and that seems to have been placating Delta in terms of what they're looking for. Civilian guys, and I know there's a couple of you, where did you get your private, your instrument, your commercial, your multi-engine, your CFI, your II, your MEI, your ATP, your type ratings? I have 8. I had to sit and count this morning when they put me in the spot there. Where did I do all of those training elements? It is painful on that section, right? Now, the record, I had one client that I've seen, as he goes, print them out at home, 34 pages in the education section alone. That's the max I've ever seen, and we've thinned that out, right? Requal training, they're not interested, right? Where you did your AED training for the Air Force, because they're going to have an AED in your squadron ops room somewhere, and you had to go through that thing, that's not going in the education section, right? Let's keep it high-level aircraft-related stuff. Okay, Navy guys, same drill, right? Where'd you go to the VTs, right? You went to VT Ump, and you did that in Corpus, and then you went off and flew T-45s in Meridian. I'm going to see VT Ump in Corpus, and then I'm going to see VT Ump in Meridian. Then I'm going to see you go off to the RAG, right? And I'm going to see your initial qual in the RAG. Then I'm going to see you go to the fleet. When you get to the fleet, I'm going to see your qualifications when you get to the fleet as you come back. All right, here's where your head just explodes. Because when you get into the work history section, some of these are the same, right? So the work history section is going to cover PCSs. So every PCS that we've gone, where that's going to be in the work history section. So my VT6 in Corpus is, or actually that's in Meridian, but my VT31 in Corpus is also going to be in the work history section. Because that same bit of data lives in two spots, the same bit of data should have the same things. It should say Training Squadron 31. The address that you use should be the same in both places. The dates that you attended in the work history section should be the same dates that you attended in the education section. And that's the level of detail that Delta looks at with these things, right? Let's talk about work history for a minute. At a minimum, every PCS, all right? Some guys will take techniques and break those things out, all right? So you've been at a PCS, but within that PCS, you started at the squadron, and then you took a job at the group, and then you took a job at the wing. You can break those elements out. And you want to do that. You want to sell vertical movement within your organization. And that helps, because now what do you do for the reasons for leaving? You can be descriptive, right? Competitively selected for this position, or board selected for that position, or by name requested to help stand up this particular thing at the group or the wing level, right? That helps tell your story in airline apps. And that's what we're trying to do, because remember, there's no resume that accompanies it, right? So we're telling your story. When somebody picks this up that doesn't know you from Adam, can they track and figure out what's been going on in the document? All right, so we're going to do that. Delta, by the way, as you're filling things out, if there are blank boxes, we're going to use NAs, capital N/capital A, right? So when you get into the flight engineer certificate number, that's an NA. It'll ask you what the issue date was. That's a blank box on the printout, but it's a month, day, year drop down in airline apps. You know you're getting old when I had a client ask me what a flight engineer was. I says, that's what I was before you were born. But NA is generally what, very few people have a flight engineer certificate anymore. Okay, then when we've already talked about the work history section and the education section. When you get into the addendums, Delta does like to know about hooked rides in training, right? So Southwest has told you, hey, we're interested in things that happened after you winged. And everybody's a little bit different. American, by the way, is looking for, Air Force guys are looking for Form 8 check ride failures, right? If you hooked a ride in pilot training, American's not interested. We know that Southwest isn't interested. We heard that in the message 5x5 today. FedEx, same. In their training tab, it says, did you attend UPT? Yes. Did you graduate? Yes. Not did you hook a navigation ride in T1s, or did you fail a formation ride in T6s, right? So pilot credentials, it becomes much easier. FedEx, we farted in the church while we were on campus at the academy. That's going in that particular section, right? It's almost that bad. So be sure, but keep it simple, right? Listen, everybody understands that no pilot is perfect. What the airline wants is an honest pilot, right? There's no such thing as a perfect pilot. I told people all the time, if they were looking for a perfect pilot at United, they never would have made me in charge of pilot hiring. Right? It's far from perfect, but they want an honest pilot. So you know, that if you've hooked a ride at some point across your life, congratulations, you and most of everybody else. Be prepared to talk about it, right? Be prepared to own it. But don't be afraid to put it on your document. What drives me nuts is I'll get a call, Charlie, I got the interview, but I forgot to put the training failure on my app. Hey, caramba, brother, right? It puts you in a bad spot, because now you're gonna have to go in and talk about that, about why, not only the failure, but more importantly, why did you omit it, right? And that puts you in a difficult position. It's not comfortable for anybody. Just be honest. Put the information as it happened on the document, right? The other thing I want to kind of tell you is average flight time. This is a huge thing for Delta right now. So when you're looking at average flight time, and I love it when I see 40, 40, 30, 30, 20, 20, and then maybe have a deployment where it's 100, and then it's 20, 10, or whatever. Listen, I get it. It smells like WAG all day long, and it is, right? So what we want to do for Delta is we want to fine-tune the WAG. We want to make it an educated WAG. So what Delta will do is they will look, and it's hard if you've been in the same airplane in multiple assignments, but if you've only been in one airplane in one particular assignment, it's very easy for Delta to do the math. You said that you were here and you flew the T6 in primary flight training and you never flew it anywhere else, right? I looked, there's 88 hours in your flight time section. You were in that military assignment for 6 months. Delta's gonna take 88 divided by 6, and they're gonna figure that's what your average flight time was. I always use whole numbers and average flight time boxes, right? I don't go to decimals. The app doesn't track flight time in decimals. You may input it in decimals, but it converts it to whole numbers. I just round it to the nearest whole number. But Delta likes to know that you've sharpened the pencil and that you've put a little thought into what your average flight hours are per month. So how do you do that? You just go to your HARM, you go to your spreadsheet, you go to your logbook, whatever it is that you've got from Chris at Millkeep. Flight time in that duty assignment, from this date to that date, how much did I fly, divided by how many months you were in the assignment. It's not about the size of your number, it's about the accuracy of the data, right? So don't worry that it's only 12. It's okay, right? Delta's looking for that, they want to know how many guys done overseas trips. Okay, so when you make a position report at 30 West, is it 30 West-ish? Or do you make a position report at 30 West, right? So we want to dial it in, and that's what they want to know. And so it's incredibly laborious on your end. It's a lot of work on our end too, because we'll go through and we'll try and make sure that you have tied all of those bits of data back together again, right? The other thing I want to talk about on airline apps, because I spend a lot of time talking about this with clients, are references, general references, professional recommendations, and then an internal, right? So let me start at the basement and then work my way up this. A general reference will show to you on a printout in each airline's addendum. So at the bottom of the addendum for United and Delta, it'll say general references. They are inputted into the system. Would you go to airline apps for me for just a minute? And we're going to click on my references down over here. Thank you. They're inputted into the system here. You can make a selection on this page of who you want to see, right? I want Delta to see this. I want only United to see this. I want all companies to see this. These are your general references. They get used for a background check only. It asks for a minimum of 3. If you give them 30 or if you give them 3, it's irrelevant. Do they have to work for the airline that's associated with it? No. Does it hurt? No. What you want to do is make sure you have a minimum of 3, and Delta will tell you on their page that you must have known one for at least 10 years. And so we'll look at that. And if you don't have somebody you've known for at least 10 years, Delta will send you a fix-it email for that. So that's one of the things that we're going to ops check when we do the review with you. So these are general references. I'm going to take you to the United addendum for just a second. So I'm going to go over here to my addendums. And then if you would be so kind, sir, as to click on the edit under the addendums for United. It's slow. United in the addendum has a section called background references. Delta does not have a background references section. Delta has a general references section, as does United. No, that's not it. It'll come up on the screen in just a second. At the bottom of United's addendum, it says general, or it says background references. This section at United is brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. Okay? And it asks for 4. And you're like, holy shit, I already gave you 3. Right? I get it. And it even says that you can use the same 3 as 3 of your 4. It's a trap. And it also says that you don't have to fill it out at this time. I recommend that you fill it out at this time. But have 4 people listed in that background references section. There we go. So if we click on missing under the addendum column for United, down 2 from there. And then all the way at the bottom when that page does load, you'll see the background references section. So that's kind of the basement. So I got general references, which are the same for United and Delta. or can be. And then this is the background references section, which is a feature that's unique to United Airlines in their addendum only, all right? So that's the floor. They don't score points. They get used for a background investigation. I need minimum of 3. If they're internal, that's fine. It doesn't trigger any automation. No letters go out. Nobody's going to invite you to an interview because you put your bros at United or Delta in the general references section, all right? So what happens next? Well, now if you'd scroll up to the top of that page, thank you, and down just a little bit more right there. There's a section called Professional Recommendations. So a professional recommendation is just that. It is unique to United. It is unique to Delta. They cannot be shared. A single recommendation cannot be seen by both companies. A single general reference can be seen by both companies. A professional recommendation is unique to United or it's unique to Delta. It's initiated by you clicking on Send a Request. It opens up an email box. You type in the emails of your bros. You launch comm out to them. More is better than less. Internal is better than external, right? I used to tell people all the time, I'd rather have a letter of recommendation from a United pilot than from Sister Mary saying you were a good boy in her 3rd grade class, right? So but internal is better than external, but externals are welcome. You have a commanding officer, you have a former skipper that's going to write you a professional recommendation. This is where they do it, and this is how they go into the system. These add value, these score points. More is better than less, internal is better than external. Your app does not need to be published to start sending out the request for professional recommendations, right? So what you're going to find when you push comm out to your friends is they're great friends, but they're even better procrastinators, right? Because it's going to take a while for them to pony up and put the time into writing your professional recommendation. So, but it's an important function and feature for both United and for Delta. When you do your printout and we review it, we can't see these. I don't need to see these. People are like, Charlie, what should it say? That's up to the author, right? My least favorite ones from United were, this kid rode in my jump seat. He seems like a nice guy. Oh, Lord. And when I knew the author, I would call him. And I'd say, hey, buddy, I got your regular recommendation for that kid that rode your jump seat. I looked him up. Do you know he's been arrested 3 times and gone to prison twice? He's like, no way. I'm like, well, no, not really. I says, but you don't know this guy at all, right? Come on, a recommendation, you're putting your reputation. The way I look at it is I'm putting my reputation as a line pilot at my company on the line by making a recommendation for you. I've written 3 in my career because I hold them that dear to myself. And there were people that worked directly for me in some form or fashion in a different capacity. So anyway, professional recommendations. All right, now, so I got general references, right? And then United's background references over here, they're the basement. Then I have professional recommendations. Now Delta has another level, right? You may hear it called a silver bullet. You may hear it called an internal. I call it a VFR direct. A Delta Airlines pilot has the opportunity to engage directly with Delta pilot hiring on your behalf. They can email Delta. Joe Schmo's a good dude. Take a look. That will cause Delta to pull and score your app. We want that to happen. But we don't want that to happen until your app is tight, right? Because when Delta pulls and scores it, if they're like, right? That's a wasted opportunity. But we want Delta to pull it and go, he was right. This guy would be a good fit for Delta Airlines. Let's get him in here for an interview. Our recommendation, if you have bros that are willing to do that for you, get your app dialed in, let us look at it, let us give you comm back, let us let you know, hey, everything looks tight on our end. Have them fire off comm to Delta at T minus 6 months minus 1 day. Delta, by and large, like most airlines, and we heard Southwest affirm this today too, 6 months is kind of the target for the furthest out for date of availability. Right? We had one client last week that got hired at 8 months from date of availability. Very unusual. 6 months is kind of the industry minimum as a gouge, if you will. What most guys are finding is they're 1 to 2 months from their date of availability when things are starting to happen, which totally sucks for you because you've got a date of availability, and as you get closer, you're sucking seat cushion, right? And you're like, the ejection switch is already armed, right? I need a job. It happens, right? And that's where that break glass in case of emergency thing can come in, right? You haven't heard anything, things aren't happening for whatever reason. Remember this year, Delta Airlines was dark for 6 months. Didn't invite anybody for an interview, canceled class dates. Told guys that they had given job offers to and had given class dates to go home. United was dark for 5 to 6 months. Just started interviewing again about 6 weeks ago, right? Southwest has windows, open, closed, dark in between. Right? FedEx is kind of trickling, UPS is trickling. UPS doesn't have big numbers like everybody else does. And American has been, they've been on a fairly good flow. Now American is very military friendly, right? And if you think about from the military guys that your odds are very high at American when you're casting your net there, because if you look at their numbers. So I'm going to use some chainsaw math and public numbers, right? American's going to hire 1,000 pilots. That may or may not be true. You can change the percentage, but I could do that math in public. 67% of the American hires come from their flow with PSA, Piedmont, and Envoy, thank you. Which means that's 670 pilots that are going to come from that flow, which means there's 330 slots remaining for off the street, if you will, right? Every airline tracks at some level metrics of percentages of either protected classes, or we also would track our military hires. And you saw that today. Southwest had a slide that showed you what their ratio of military hires was. If, let's say that ratio is 30% at American Airlines, 30 of the 30% that they want to hire, that's 300 dudes. How many are they going to hire off the street? 330. That bodes well for a percentage for a military pilot at American. That does not bode well for a civilian pilot. That means that 30 slots out of 1,000 are available to a civilian guy who's not in the flow, right? But it bodes well for you as a military pilot at American. American's a very military-friendly company. They all are, right? We all like our military pilots. But in particular, the odds are very high in your favor at American. All right, pilot credentials, much simpler platform per se, but ripe with opportunity to step on landmines on that document as well. The biggest thing that I see there is when I do app reviews is flight time stuff, right? Guys don't have their brains wrapped around what the rules of engagement are for flight time, because the rules of engagement for flight time on pilot credentials is different than the ROEs on airline apps, right? Airline apps, and we've talked about it in kind of some sidebar and Q&A thing here today, PIC time on airline apps excludes IP time, right? The app will, in the summary section in airline apps, it will take those two numbers and add them back together again and show you how much airplane PIC time you have. But in the flight time section, they're split. Pilot credentials, you've got two options for flight time. Well, there's three. Well, four if you include the night, right? But nighttime doesn't count towards your total. You've got PIC, SIC, and IP. The two numbers that add together on Southwest app that equal your total time, and it'll print total time at the bottom on the Southwest app. Doesn't do that for you on FedEx and American's version of pilot credentials. But on Southwest it does. Those two numbers that get added together, that's your PIC plus your SIC. So if you want your IP time to count as PIC, you must also include it in your PIC section. And the biggest error I see is guys are short, right? Because they put their flight time into pilot credentials the same way they put their flight time into airline apps. They excluded their PIC time. So when you do two app reviews with us, what I do is I sit down and I ops check your flight times. What did you say that you had going on for Delta? What did we say we have going on in pilot credentials? It's a little bit harder to ops check that on Southwest because most of you use the 0.3 per sortie conversion. But I can get a pretty good feel based on the weights of the numbers on, are you in the ballpark? Did you do the inclusion or not do the inclusion, right? So PIC plus SIC equals total time on the pilot credentials app. In an airplane, where the other thing that guys generally step on landmines on in pilot credentials is in the civilian world. So before I go down that rabbit hole, are there any civilian guys left in here? 1, 2? All right. Part 61 allows you to log time. If you're a rated airman and you're receiving instruction, it allows you to log that as PIC time. In airline apps, most people log it as PIC, plus they'll include it as student. So let's say I got 50 hours of PIC time in a 172, 30 of it was student, for a total time in the airplane of 50, right? So I didn't double count it towards my total. I had 20 really that I was flying as a student, but I was able to log that, dual log that as PIC. When they go to pilot credentials, they'll put 50 as PIC, 30 as SIC. That equals 80 hours of total time. You only have 50 total in the airframe. So you've overinflated your flight time by 30 hours there. So that's one of the other things that we help you ops check as you go through. And it's bamboozling, right? And I tell my clients all the time, and for those guys that have worked with me, you've heard this shtick before. When you get to the flight time section, I'm like, listen, hey, for a military pilot categorically, this section of the app sucks. It's a square peg and a round hole at every turn. The instructions are either not there or awkward. And if you were to ask 10 guys in your squadron how they did it, you get 12 different answers, right? So what's important? What's important is what you can relay in the interview. How are you going to verify your times? How are you going to justify your times? How are you going to make sense out of what you have done over the course of your career to the person that has never met you before, right? And which is why I don't teach any formulas, right? By the time you're working with me, you've already come up with what works in your head. And the last thing I want to do is tell you, listen, you should do it this way. And then you get to the interview and you're like, shit, I can't remember what Charlie told me. Right? So you're going to have your method that works for you. And everybody's is going to be different. Every branch of the service, and we've heard it all day today, every branch of the service logs time differently, right? If only it were simple, and it's not, and we get it. The airlines understand that too. But can you make heads or tails out of it so that you can present it in a way that your audience can understand the data, rationalize the data, and use the data effectively as they're evaluating you overall? All right, so that's kind of a lot of stuff. But at a high level, what I want to do is kind of take questions from you guys and see if there are things that I can help vector you on without looking at your document per se. Yes, sir?
I have 2 questions for you specific to American Airlines. Things that I've noticed, you already talked about the school and the description program. This is separate though.
That was for Delta.
Yeah.
Caveat.
So similarly with American,
no similars.
we can extend this as long as we want. Anyway, the position title,
and
then there's the position description or description of duties.
Right.
How do you suggest we navigate, like, I'm a pilot, or I had multiple ground jobs that I'm deeply proud of that earned me awards that my squadron said, hey, great, thanks for coming, here you go. But then I also had these flight instructor qualifications, NATOPS, et cetera. Which title do I roll with, and then how do I describe it in 8 characters?
49.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where I was going with the education section is that for American, and I don't want to talk out of school, so if I'm saying something wrong for Southwest, please correct me, but they're interested in your undergraduate and graduate degree programs in the education section. They don't need to know where you got your ATP. They don't need to know where you got your ACIP, EP, LMNOP qual, right? They want to know where you got your bachelor's degree, your master's degree, your doctorate degree, your multiple master's degree, whatever that might be. College/university is your clue to the education section in pilot credentials. To the answer to your question, you got 49 characters, right? I just try and be effective with the duty position title, right? What is demonstrating leadership within that assignment that's going to help sell you and differentiate you? Pilot is not a great differentiator, right? But if you're an instructor, if you're whatever your leadership position may have been within that organization, is a great place to put that. In your description, if you will, you only get 49 characters in pilot credentials. Assuming we're not in global, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, right? So your vehicle for transmittal of the really good stuff comes on the resume, right? So you're going to give a high-level sniff on the app for what it is that you're doing, realizing that you're completely hamstrung. And then you're going to use the resume to tell the rest of your story, right? Not the whole story, but more than 49 characters worth. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Under work history, right, we go through each of our PCSs. So, 12 years ago, I was in Korea, and my supervisor was this person, and here's the phone number of that supervisor. Honestly, are they going to go, holy no? So what value is that? How much research should I do to get that information?
So I'll speak for the pilot credential or the airline app side of the house for just a minute, and then if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot and see if it's at least the same. When we did a background check at United Airlines for a military pilot, we were not calling all of your duty stations over the course of your career. When we did a background, now I'm not talking about references, right? I'm talking about work history, supervisors, and phone numbers. If you were a military pilot and if you were in the Air Force, we would call the Department of the Air Force and verify your time in service. We were not calling Columbus to see if you went to UPT there 21 years ago, right? And we're certainly not trying to find Colonel Smith at Columbus from 21 years ago, right? Because and I had one client, deceased, right? He went and researched everybody that was on there. Well, and good on him, right? I can't hold that against him. He's trying to present the information the best that he can. When it comes to the background check, our background check, it was just simply a call to your branch of the service to verify your time in service. And again, this is exclusive of a reference check, and so in a background check. Would that be fair to make that assessment? No. So different for you guys. Okay. Oh, yeah, please, if you don't mind. Oh, no, not at all. This is good for everybody.
Tired of me yet? Is it working?
Can we turn on the microphone?
Good. How about now? So if we're talking about the pilot credentials piece?
Right, and
okay.
Supervisor names and phone numbers.
So there's,
well, actually, those don't display on yours.
They don't. So we gather the same information in a couple of different ways at Southwest. We do ask you for that work history on your pilot credentials, which is probably similar. Some of those have phone numbers attached. Where we gather that information and we actually use it is part of our PREA records request, and I hesitate to get into PREA because it doesn't apply to military folks in general. It is, do you want to talk about PREA? Or
so
should we just skip it?
No. So PREA
Okay.
is the Pilot Record Improvement Act. And so it's required for if you have worked for a Part 121, 125, or a Part 135 airline, right? And there's an FAA 8060-10, 8060-11, et cetera, that they'll do and request those records. But there isn't that from the military.
Right. So in lieu of PREA for military folks, we ask you to bring your training records so we can see your FEF, your NATOPS jacket, whatever form you have that. But it's part of our paperwork package. We ask you to fill out the PREA records request. Even though you are military, we ask you to fill that out. Part of that is your job history going back 10 years. We will call those people. So we all know military folks move around. So not only have you left that place of employment, but the person you worked for while you were there also has moved on, probably PCS'd in some period of time. What we want you to do is put a contact who can verify that you were employed at that unit when you said you were employed, hopefully somebody who was a supervisor of some form or fashion, and provide a current method for us to get in touch with that person. Phone numbers sometimes are hard to come by. If you have an email address, that is okay. We like cell phone numbers. If you happen to know where that person is because you all went to the same unit after unit after unit, that's excellent. If you don't, just do the best that you can. If you can't think of anybody who was there with you who was a supervisor, then a peer who can verify that you were in fact at that unit during those years that you said you were there, somebody that we can speak to verify that you are who you said you were. Does that make sense? So we do actually call those places.
But to be clear for you guys, that data is collected at the interview
or
post CJO.
It is one that you bring with you.
Okay, so it's data that you would send. Welcome to Southwest, you're invited for the interview.
Yes, it's part of our package of paperwork that you bring with you to the interview.
Okay.
Hopefully you have filled it out already, so I'm not asking you to go get your phone so we can fill it out together. Follow the instructions, right? Does that make sense? So we do actually use that information. Do the best you can to come up with contact information for at least somebody who was there with you during the years that you were in that place.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, sir.
I had one question. Do you advise, or is it a good technique because you get more characters on the global side to sync only that data? Does that provide value to the
You thought you were done. Would you prefer to see verbose statements, or would you prefer to see it on the resume?
About which data in particular are we talking about?
Position data.
On there, so where you can get more bang for your buck, I guess, under that position. Instead of 49, it's like 150.
You get almost 200 characters.
That's so much reading. That's a lot of words. When we're looking at the employment section, I just want to be able to trace your career path from your first flying piece of whatever service you are in, year by year, month by month, to where you are currently sitting. If you add a whole bunch of words in there and you tell me every job that you had in that squadron for the 18 months you were there before you moved to the next squadron and the next squadron and the next jobs, I don't need to know all of that stuff. If it's something that's a high-level leadership thing, you were the DO, you were the evaluator, you were any of those things that we really care about and you want to highlight there, that's fine. That's not where I'm looking for it. I'm looking for it on your resume. I'm looking for it in your pilot credentials. It might jump out at me in that employment section, but really I'm more interested in tracking your career path and making sure there aren't any gaps in employment, because that tells me you're trying to hide something from me, which is what I'm looking for, right?
Right.
So the employment part is more about your career path. Those other qualifications, we look for that in those other places. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
What else?
Oh, well, I don't know. Don't sit down yet. That hasn't worked for you yet. Yes, sir.
It comes to like career history. How do you put deployments in there? It's kind of assigned to each squadron.
Right. So, how we manage deployments is if it was less than a year, then it was a deployment. It was a TDY assignment, right? So you can do that in one of two different ways. You can break it out. I typically only break out deployments if there was something about the deployment that was value added. You are the deployed director of operations, right? So there's a leadership role and responsibility that happens on the deployment. If you're a KC-135 guy at the home station, you deploy and you're passing gas, and it's not any different than what you're doing at the home station, and you come back, I don't break it out because there wasn't any extra value in the piece. Certainly the deployment's it's not that it's not valuable, but it's just as you're trying to flow through the document, and it can get extremely convoluted if we list every deployment. Now the Army guys are different. Are any of those guys still here? Yeah, shit, you guys go for a year plus, right? So in your particular case, I list the deployments because that's a giant chunk of time with where it is that you're going. It's not like a 3-month deployment like a KC-135 guy or some of the other guys might do, supporting some of the other things. The Army guys, you guys are way different. Yes, sir.
What about if it was a non-flying? It's obvious there's a gap in the flight records from July to December.
There's a couple different ways to handle that, right? So you can either address that or it depends on which airline we're talking about. You can address the non-flying role that you had during that period of time on the resume. In the duties description, it becomes very easy to do for United and Delta because you can add a block, you can add a sentence to what you were doing in the duties description there, right? Easy to manage. Yes, sir. Right. No. I do like that you were enlisted in the Navy, right? In my perspective, and I'm talking out of school here a little bit because I don't represent any airline, but I have an incredible appreciation over the course of the years that I've done this for people that have gotten out of high school and gone in and enlisted in the military and then have said to themselves, I want to go be a pilot. And that is such an incredible commitment. There's a lot of grit, there's a lot of tenacity, there is a lot of dirt under your fingertips and doing those things that I think that I would include that enlisted time on your resume all day long. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Delta is insanely long educational section. So weapons school for the Air Force isn't really
Yes.
involved, but it's pretty long.
No, but it's pretty important because a lot of times when you come out of weapons school, what that does then is there's an IP qual that comes out of that too. Because now you're debriefing, right? If you've gone to Top Gun, then the expectation is, well, and that's the Navy's version, but if you go to fighter weapons school, when you come back out of that, the expectation is that you're debriefing every hop with a group like that, yes, I would include something like, now the other piece that I would add, by the way, too, when we're talking about the laborious bits is PME, high level PME, right? Squadron Officer School, ACSC, Air War College for the Air Force guys. Navy and the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard and the Army do it a little bit differently, right? But your high level PME stops along the way, I would include in the education section. For Delta, by default, United, right? I know. Guys are like, why can't it be easy? I'm like, job security, right?
So not for American.
Sir?
But not for American.
No, American pilot credentials, college/university. So, but hold on, so you go to ACSC, but you also get a master's degree out of attending ACSC. It's a master's degree program. That should be in your education section because it's a master's degree that came from there, right? Everything's a little bit situationally different. Squadron Officer School wouldn't show up. There's not a master's degree that comes from there. Congratulations, you're in 04, right? And as you go through. Yes, sir?
For the pilot credentials, whole area here for the Southwest folks that got transferred and it's all wonky and it doesn't work. Is there any other airlines that doesn't pilot credentials local is not working for?
Is there anybody here from Pilot Credentials? I'm stealing all of Mike's lines. Global sucks. Sorry, that was my outside voice. Global is a terrible product. It's fantastic in theory. Wouldn't it be nice if you could jam all your stuff into one spot, hit sync, and it would put that exact same data into 3 different airlines' stuff? But it doesn't. I don't know why. I don't know, I can't tell you, it's only this data field that's wonky. Oh no. Yeah, and so the old Pilot 2.0 or Global 2.0 is out, new and improved. Well, it's still terrible, right? So it's just, and I understand that it's dreadful and it's painful, but my recommendation is to hand jam your entries. If you push it one time from Global and sync because you've already got it loaded into Global, that's fine. One of the mistakes that people make in Pilot Credentials is they load Global and they think they've applied to United, American, and FedEx. But they haven't. Or, sorry, Southwest American and FedEx. Global is just a data collection spot, right? And then you go in and there's a questionnaire thing and there's a profile. I can put my picture in there, right? Well, and then you go, but the picture doesn't go. And by the way, the airline doesn't want to see your picture, right? Don't include it as part of your attachment. So we try and limit and tell me we try and limit your attachments to your resume, right? And the reason we don't want to see your picture and the reason that, and some of the airlines will tell you to obscure if you attach a document. FedEx will tell you, I think it's FedEx, that they want you to obscure anything that has your date of birth on it. They don't want to know how old you are. At United, we were extremely paranoid about that. And if I didn't know how old you were, then you didn't have a claim that I didn't hire you because you were under 40 or over 40. Or you didn't have a claim that I didn't hire you because you were A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever it is that it might be, right? Tangential piece of that. I get a lot of questions. Hey, Charlie, what do I put on here for disabled veteran? Or should I put on here that I'm a Native American, Eskimo, Black Indian, Asian woman? That data gets collected in what I'll call in an autonomous way. It's collected by request. It's you have the option to participate in giving that information to the airline. The airline reports on a routine basis to the Department of Labor, and there are definite things that they look for with that. But the airline cannot search for the women in the database. The airline cannot search for minority pilots in the database. So you can identify yourself as whatever you feel like identifying with on that particular day, right? This is 2018, right? But it will not influence when you get to the interview. The airline can't see that bit of data, right? It's tracked on a macro level, not on a micro level. So answer it however you feel is appropriate. No one can see the data except in an aggregate mass. X percentage of applicants at airline ABC are white males, right? Whatever it is that it might be. Anybody else?
Is there a publish button on one versus the other?
They are all a little bit different, right? So there is a publish button in some of the airlines, right? So be careful when you go through with that. If you're going to publish your information, publish good data, right? Don't publish it halfway done, or just publish it. But when you put your documents out there, make sure that what you're putting is your best foot forward, because you don't know when somebody's going to pick it up and they're going to read it. And when they do, you want the time that recruiter or reviewer spent with your document to be value-added time. You want it to be quality. So don't put crud out there. Make sure that it's dialed in, right? The other thing is updating. We recommend that you update no less than once every 30 days. And you heard that message from Southwest today too, right? In airline apps, I could filter the system. I could say, show me all the people that have updated within X amount of time. And I could set the date range, right? The system, airline apps as a whole, will kick you out of their system and make you unviewable at 180 days. When I left pilot hiring 4 years ago at United, we were using 90 days. 30 is super conservative. I got some clients that update every week. I got some guys that update after every flight. To me, once a month is good juju. I sit down in front of my computer once a month to pay all my bills. I want Airline ABC to pay my bills for me, so I'm going to spend 10 minutes that night updating my apps for the airline, and it's done. It's off my list of things to do. When you update your app, again, I mentioned this before, I recommend updating a revised resume, right? Give the airline good data, right? It's like the FMC, garbage in, garbage out. If you're putting garbage data in and that's what the airline sees, you're probably going to get a garbage out solution, right? If you're giving them good data, let them evaluate you, right? Let them figure out, is this the person that I want to have come in and spend time with me in the interview? And then when you get there, close the deal, right? Fabulous advice today on when you do interview prep, right? Be you. Who do they want to meet? They want to meet you, right? Have tone, have passion, have inflection, have a desire. Don't come in and roll out, I'm a pilot, right? Great, where do you fly? 453rd. What do you do? I'm a tanker driver, right? Oh shit, I don't know anything about you yet, right? So get a little fire in your belly, have some passion, right? Be energetic, look at the company, look at who you're interviewing with, look at the history of that company. Certainly that's not, like when I see Southwest, man, what I have in my head for that is the pilot going onto the airplane with his hand on the heart logo on the side of the main cabin door at L1, right? Love that picture because I think that speaks to your culture. And it's very impactful. Know who your audience is when you go in. But the paperwork is what's going to help you get to that point. And it's laborious. If you haven't started the paperwork, it takes time. Most of my clients, I bet, have 40 hours into their apps by the time they roll in hot with me. And that I'm probably underestimating for a lot of guys, right? What else? Anything? Or are we all hitting the, let's give some free shit and go drink beer? Yes, sir.
I got a question on, I guess, how it goes in the resume and then work job description.
Okay.
So I'm an Air Force guy. Obviously, the Air Force performance report system is a little awkward. Is there any interest in taking the Air Force strats and putting those, or how they want to be quantified?
So I'll give you my opinion on that. I think the one entity that thinks Air Force strats are great is the Air Force. When I see guys, when they send them to me and it's got the achievements and awards and it's loaded with strats, I never want to hurt anybody's feelings and I don't tell them to pull them out. If it doesn't have the strats in there, I don't tell them they need to put them in, right? I think we're more interested in what you have done and how you've contributed. When I work with clients on a resume, and I haven't really talked about resumes, and there's a lot of different ways to manage a resume, okay? And my company doesn't have a template. I don't give you a template and say, this is what I want your resume to look like, because everybody's resume should have their own unique DNA in there. And I don't want Southwest to say, oh, this is another CheckedAndSet guy, right? And form an opinion or have an impression before they've even had a chance to look at the document, right? So there's 100 different ways to present data. But in my opinion, I use what I call an accomplishment-based style. If you think about OPRs, that is in essence an accomplishment-based style. But OPRs, depending on who wrote them, some people write very effectively with them and other people don't. You know, the most commonly overused words in OPRs are fit reps or whatever your branch of service calls them, oversaw, led, planned, and managed, right? Hand selected? Yeah. So it's oh, no, that's good. So it's easier, you can peel the layer of the onion back. And I'll give you an analogy on that one. And again, I'm loving the dynamic here. Oftentimes when pilots are writing about their career and they're writing about their non-flying assignments, they think that they only should write about the flying assignments. And so, you know, you got your tour that you're deployed and you're in a non-flying position when you're doing the deployment. There's good things that are happening from there. And the analogy that I give with that is I taught on the 787 for 2.5 years. And some of you heard this story last night. When we were teaching somebody new on the airplane, we would tell them, hey, turn on the autopilot at 200 feet on the climb out. Let the airplane do what it needs to do, and you can come back a little bit and begin to learn and check stuff out. So autopilot on at 200 feet, and then leave the autopilot on until the minimum autopilot disconnect altitude, 135 feet radio altimeter on the way back in. So on a 14-hour flight, I'm responsible for demonstrating my outstanding airmanship for 335 feet, right? I got that shit nailed. What am I doing the rest of the time? I'm managing, right? I'm managing fuel, time, airspace, energy, expectations, a crew, passengers, right? There's a lot of things going on in my world that are not, how's this small? How's this big? Ugh, fly, right? So don't think that the things that you have done outside of stick and rudder things are unimportant, right? Does that resonate? Okay. I love talking about this stuff. For those of you who've had a chance to work with me personally, I appreciate it. I hope you have picked up that, I taught in the schoolhouse between Continental and United on the 737-56 and the 787 for 14 years. I love helping people have the light bulb come on. And when they have that aha moment, it feels good for me. And that drives me. And when I get an email, and I got one today, Charlie, just want to let you know I got the interview with United coming up on December 13th or whatever. That's a good feeling for us. And so we want to help you be successful. But you guys are the ones that are doing the work, right? I'm helping you with content format, punctuation, grammar, spelling. Oh, please, spelling, right? Right. One guy even had his name misspelled. But, you know, when you're and we've all had that for Delta, we've all had that fast food job, right? And his was, instead of shift manager, was shit manager, right? And spell check isn't going to catch that, right? That's right. So, okay, so last little bit of advice I'll give you, unless you have any other questions on that thing. When you're doing your own review at home, and you should do your own review at home, print the app on paper, all right? You have seen it 100 times on your screen. And the box always ends right here, and your data keeps going to over here, right? Print the damn thing, and then pick it up and look at it. And that's what I do when I do a review. I print every one of my clients' paperwork, and then I go and I have a drawer full of red pens and highlighters, and I just go through and I try to follow your story. What story are you trying to tell me? Am I picking up what you're laying down, or am I in the weeds and lost? And if I'm in the weeds and lost, then we're going to talk, because I don't want to be in the weeds and lost, because if I'm in the weeds and lost, guess who else is in the weeds and lost, right? But if you're looking at your document on paper, those things will leap off the page at you, I promise. And then make your corrections, and then roll in hot. And then let us take a look, or somebody else too. It doesn't have to be my company. I'm not the only company out here that does this. What I want is you to be successful, right? So wherever your engagement lies, but I would not allow your friends to be your final filter, right? They're good dudes, and I get it, and they have good intentions, but they know you. And because they know you, they will mentally close gaps that someone who doesn't know you would otherwise see. So have somebody that doesn't have any idea who you are ops check your work, Because your wife's going to connect the dots for you, or your spouse is going to connect the dots and not see that big picture look down. All right? Yes, sir?
One big picture question that for you, obviously it's going to be before you publish. I know that there's like some of them where there's a gotcha that you want to have it as published as long as you can to have an active application in the system. And some, once you publish, you can't modify. Right?
So the only one that, once you publish it, you can't modify is UPS. Yes. You can modify it at any time. The app is live. If you've published, it's in the system, you can go update it at any time, right? The caution there is, and what we recommend is if you've been invited for an interview with a company, slow your roll, right? Most companies are going to compare what the app looked like when you were invited for the interview against what the app looks like when you arrive at the interview. United and Delta both tell you that in their welcome packages, right? We're going to compare your app. Why do they do that? I'll give you a classic example. I would debrief every one of my interview teams every day. Hey, how did things go today? Oh, went great, went awesome, went ooh, not so good. Okay, let's talk, because I had to explain up the food chain about what happened. Paperwork comes back, application, the interview went really well. I always brought all the paperwork back to my office, sat down, did a high-level flip through at the end of each day. DUI. 3 years ago. I must have been really sleepy when I sent that invite out for an interview, because we didn't do that at United Airlines. So I went back and looked at what the app looked like when we invited the person for the interview. No DUI. Right? So the theory was, from the applicant's standpoint, well, I'm not going to put it on there because I'm going to get the interview. And then when I get the interview, I'm going to sign that piece of paper at the front that says everything is true and correct. They added the DUI onto the paperwork from 3 years ago, the day before the interview. Right? Obviously, there was no CJO attached to that. So pilots do dumb stuff, right? Don't be the pilot that does the dumb stuff. They're going to self-eliminate, right? You're going to drive right down the middle and have a CJO waiting for you. But yeah, so once you've got the invite from the airline, certainly, if I move, should I update my address? Of course you should, right? If I move from an active duty to a reserve squadron, should I update my application? Of course you should, right? If I have flight time that I've done since I've done some else, should I update my app? Of course you should, right? But now's not the time for your 4.0 GPA to be a 1.2, and we graduated from Harvard on the first version, and it's the Lehigh Valley Community College on the final version, right? No bueno. You'd be surprised. But they self-eliminate, which is helpful. What else? All right, the only thing between us and the end of the day is free stuff. Thank you. I appreciate your time.